Record. Okay, so the first thing you'd want to do is make a new catalog. And so I'm going to kind of start mine fresh. And I always think about, you always want to think about where to store it. So assuming, these days you're working on your own home computer, so it doesn't really matter where you put it. But in the case of sort of traveling back and forth to campus and we're using your home computer versus an on-campus computer, I would always put it on an external hard drive. And I always store things in a different way, or I like store all my artwork versus this is all my images from a camera, basically. So what I normally do is tell students to make just a folder that says like photo class or Lightroom. And in my case, I actually do something a little bit differently where I import my files from the camera. I put them into different folders. You can see them all organized by date and then some sort of description. And what I do is each folder, oh, don't make me a liar. Where is it? Each folder has, okay, it's not in there. I'm gonna go up to here where I know that there's one. Has a folder that I've created a Lightroom catalog inside of. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna maybe make one of this for this folder here, and I'll import these photos. So this might be a little bit differently than how for Marissa particularly, how or Tyler, if he's still here, how I've demonstrated in class. But this I find is a way for me to organize things more clearly. You could just make one folder just in the main hard drive here, somewhere connected to your photos, of course, because you don't ever want to get your Lightroom catalog separated from your photos, because the database won't be able to find them then. And I'll kind of explain that a little bit more in a bit. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a subfolder in this file here. I'm calling it basically what the folder was. But you could just make one folder and call it Lightroom catalog. The point is, you want to keep things in alignment. You never want to separate the folder with your photos to be out of the same file structure as your actual catalog, because the catalog is just a database that remembers your photos. And when you edit photos in Lightroom, unlike when you edit them in Photoshop, it doesn't actually, it like remembers those changes in the database, but it doesn't apply them to the original photos. So it's a non-destructive way of working. So let me kind of import a set of photos here, and I'll try and illustrate this. So I'm just finding that photo.
Can't see.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Why did it do that? Here we go. I just showed the desktop. There we go. All right. So I'm just finding that folder of photos that I had, and I'm going to click import. And so that's going to bring all these images into the database. I don't care about address lookup. And it's going to take a while because there's like a few hundred photos in there, but these are all photos that I've taken of the senior exhibitions last semester. So they're really not anything amazing, but they'll work for illustrative purposes. So it's importing all the photos. You can see in the top left corner here, this bar is the progress bar. And I'm going to just kind of scroll down and find a photo that I'll end up editing probably. I guess we could do one of the, well, these are all like 360 photos. I'm going to just grab like this one. So I'm in the library catalog. That's how you import and export things. You'll just have those buttons in the bottom left corner here. There's some other info in these bars that is maybe not as relevant, but I'll point out particularly the metadata. So it gives you your file name, I've put in copyright info, which I can show you how to do maybe another time, but it tells me like the date that it was captured and the time, the size of my photo, the exposure and the focal length of the lens and other things related to the camera. But what I really want to do is I want to find one or more photos to edit. And when I want to actually edit something, once I've imported them into the catalog, I'll just click on the develop button. It brings up the whole develop module panel here. And for anyone that's used Photoshop before, but not Lightroom, this is going to look like the sliders in the Adobe Camera Raw, if you've ever shot RAW, that is. And whether you've shot raw or shot a JPEG, all these things are going to look the same in Lightroom. So it's kind of like it keeps things consistent, has a consistent way of processing through things. So we got our histogram at the top right here. I'm going to see if I can make this all larger. Well, that's a little bit, but basically in the histogram, the important things are these triangles in the top left and right, which I might just mess up my exposure a bit. You'll see these blue indicators come up in the dark parts of the photo. If my exposure is really dark, those are areas that are pure black, or if my exposure was really bright, areas that don't have detail on the whites will be pure red. Now this was actually a decent exposure, so we don't really have that problem, but that's what those two boxes in the corners are for. These are our tools for editing, but first we always kind of go through this basics tab on the right. And in the basics tab, we have a quick, easy way to switch to black and white by just clicking on it. It's not necessarily the best, but we can talk about that more later. And then we can color balance using the sliders for warm and cool temperature, or pink versus green, or I should say magenta green tint. And really usually what works best is this gray eyedropper tool, where you just click on something you know to be gray. And I like to click on shadow areas. So I'm going to click in right over here. Okay, that didn't work as well as I thought. I don't know about the color on your screens, how it would be coming through on the internet, but it's not that, it's a little blue still on mine. So I'm going to just click in the, I clicked over here and it didn't do anything majorly different, but I think we're slightly overexposed is part of the problem. But the color balance is decent. The floor looks more yellow than the countertop, which might be the color of the paint. If I click on an area of gray in the floor, okay, I actually think that's decent. But basically your gray eyedropper tool is your friend for color balancing. You could go in there and fine tune it if you really know how to see color well, but I guess I should say that your computers at home are probably not calibrated. So if you've got a new, particularly like an iMac, which is what I'm working on, the color is usually pretty good straight out of the factory. But what I would normally do is pass around a color monitor calibrator to the class and have everyone actually calibrate it so that what the computer thinks it's displaying is actually what's displayed on the screen. But since we can't do that because we're all remote, you just got to go with what looks best, and you'll kind of, you'll hopefully be able to do an okay job. So after that, you've got the tone settings for exposure, contrast, highlight, shadow, whites, blacks. A lot of people just click on auto and see what that does. Honestly, on my screen, this still looks overexposed, so it didn't do a great job. But it's adjusted some things to kind of pull out detail and the shadows particularly. I'm going to pull my exposure down because on my screen, that's probably going to look good about there. Contrast and a few of these other settings, I would never go more than about 20 points. So a lot of students have this sort of gut of just pulling up your contrast like there, and like, oh, the colors really pop better when I do that. Well, they do, but they're not realistic. So depending on whether you're looking to recreate reality, which normally we try to do, you don't really want to go past about 20 points. So I would say, maybe leave it alone, or maybe go only to like 20 and just stick with that. When I roll over highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, it's going to highlight areas in the histogram up here. And that is the areas where it's going to affect most. So the highlights and the whites will affect the right end. The whites affect the farthest right end. The highlights, kind of the, quarter to the top. The shadows, quarter to the bottom, and the blacks are all the way at the bottom, looking at the histogram. So if you know a histogram, if you see any information spiking up on the wall, you know maybe what you need to adjust first. If the rest of the photo looks good, which it doesn't in this case, but you know what you need to adjust to get detail in the whites. So we can pull our whites down, but it still doesn't look good. So let me reset my exposure back to where it was, which was like minus 20 or something like that. But you can see as I pull them up, it's going to wash out those. Really, I would say normally I just kind of leave all of these at 0 and only play with them if I really need them. Which for this photo, I don't think we really need to. So I might pull up my shadows just a little bit because there's a little figure in here that's a little dark that I want to be able to see, but that's really all. Texture, clarity, and dehaze, these are all going to affect kind of the details in your image. If I pull up texture, it usually looks really grainy, which is doing a little bit in some of these. Clarity sharpens. So again, maybe 20 points if you feel like it needs it. Clarity is not something we'd pull up if we're doing a portrait because it's going to make every pore on someone's face pop out, which is usually not very flattering. And then dehaze is, well, if you pull it to the left, it's going to make your photo hazy. If you pull it to the right, it's going to kind of like, it adds contrast into the shadows, I guess is the best way to describe it. But really, you only use dehaze if you have a hazy photo. A blurry photo, no, this is not going to fix, but if it's a little hazy, it can help. All right, and then vibrance and saturation. Vibrance and saturation do very similar things. Saturation, it typically is the historic slider in an image. And I don't have a good example here of the difference because I don't have a portrait in this catalog, but the difference is when you pull up saturation, it's going to make every color value more intense. So for one, again, this is one of the tools that you would only use maybe 20 points increased because it doesn't look realistic. But the difference and the reason there is this vibrance is that vibrance will increase the color in all values except for traditional skin tones. So tones that have some red blood in them. I think it's probably more, it's a bit racist. It's probably targeted more towards white skin tones than to others. But particularly what it's going to do is it's going to increase the color in everything but the skin tones. So depending on what you're photographing, you'd want to use one or the other. I suppose you could use vibrance on everything. Just know that it's not going to increase the color in the like cream red, like yellow red colors. So this is kind of like the main area to focus on when you're using Lightroom. Aside from that, what I always try to cover is the tools. So the tools here are from simple using the crop tool. You can just click on it and you can set your aspect ratio here if you want to do a specific crop. Otherwise, it usually defaults to original. And there's this lock button, which will lock it to original. So what it means is that when you grab a corner and you pull it in, if you pull it down, see how my cursor is not actually on the corner, it's going to stay locked to that 2:3 proportions. Whereas if I unlock that, it'll just follow wherever my cursor goes. Okay. So if I want to go back to original, I can click that and I can just kind of crop in. I can click to move the box around. If I grab one corner and pull it kind of out of the way, it flips it from vertical to horizontal, which doesn't work well for this image, but I think it illustrates it well. And then there's also the ability to use this level tool next to the word angle here. Why is it trying? It's trying to make me download Flash. Okay. And this level tool, if you click and drag on the horizon line, which I don't have a horizon line here, but it will rotate the photo. Okay, I guess I was pretty square to that, but let me mess it up. I'm gonna make the horizon over here. If I know that I have a horizon line or something that is perfectly vertical or horizontal, I can click and drag on it and it will set that to be perfectly horizontal in this case, or if I was going up, down, it was set to be perfectly vertical. So it's gonna kind of rotate a little. If we click outside of the box, we have the ability to rotate our crop. This is different. This is kind of like the opposite of what Photoshop does, I believe. In Photoshop, you would click and drag and it would move this box at an angle, whereas when I'm clicking and dragging, it's moving the sort of background, the image, at an angle. But it's pretty similar. If you're happy with it, hit close. If you're not happy with it, you can hit reset. I'm gonna go ahead and hit reset. The next tool is retouching. So this is like your clone stamp tool versus healing brush tool in Photoshop. So if well, first of all, I can make my size, my feather, and my opacity different. And the bracket keys and shift and bracket, if you're used to Photoshop, they're similar in Lightroom, where the bracket key will make it larger, Shift and the bracket key will make it harder or softer, depending if you're doing it left or right. Or if you just like sliders, you can just pull sliders. So I'm going to start with the clone because I think that's easier to understand. I'm going to click on it on a spot, and it's going to automatically grab this other circle is my sample from, and then this is my paste to. So wherever I click is my paste to spot, but I can move that around too. I could swap them in position if I wanted. If I make my feather lower, it makes my tool softer. And I can reduce my opacity if I only want it to go halfway through. But normally you'd have a decent feather and a small size and full opacity for these. So that's our clone, and the difference between clone and heal. Clone takes these actual pixels and puts them to where your to spot is. And if I click on heal, it will take the texture and paste it into the color of the other one, which doesn't look good at all here. But if I was retouching portrait or something like that, it would blend an area, say like the right-hand side of the face is brighter than the left hand, but you wanted to sample the texture of the skin from one side to the other. Well, the heal brush would balance out the brightness from one side to the other and just pull the texture over so it blends in well. So that's our clone versus heal. Clone is going to be actual pixels. Heal is more working with texture. The next one is red eye reduction, which all it's going to do is, well, first of all, you should never have a flash for your portraits that would cause red eye. Red eyes can be caused when the flash is too close to the lens. So light goes in, bounces off the red of the back of the eye, and bounces back out. But this tool will allow you to just paint over the eye with this tool. You can size it to the shape of the eye, and it'll just take out the red. It won't take out anything else. It'll just take out the red. The next one is gradient. So this would be, say I want to darken one side of my photo and not the other. I can just click and drag, and I can adjust my exposure slider here to either decrease exposure or increase exposure, or any of the rest of these things, but exposure is usually what we use it for. I can click on my dot here to move it left and right, or I suppose I could click on the middle bar and make it up, down, kind of rotate it around. And if I want it to be a harder transition or a softer transition, I can grab the outside lines and pull them closer together. Now you'll see it's a harder transition, whereas I could spread them out to be a softer transition. So that'll work for any of these sliders. It's pretty easy. It works great for landscapes. If like the sky is too bright and the ground is too dark, a quick transition would work. I'm going to go on to the radial gradient. It's the same idea, except you're drawing it in a circle. So if you want to make a vignette, for example, where the outside of the photo is darker, you could pull the slider down. You can reshape your circle to be more round versus more oval. You can move it around by grabbing the center point. And if you adjust the feather, it can be a softer transition versus a harder transition. There's also this invert option where you can apply it to the outside. So if I wanted to maybe, well, I guess this is the inside. If I wanted to darken the inside versus darken the outside, you can just flip it, the invert. All right, and then my favorite, let me get rid of this first. My favorite is the adjustment brush. And this allows you to, for example, decrease the exposure in one part of a photo versus another. And I could, well, I don't know if this is really what I would do, but I could like darken all the background of my photo in a non-linear gradient or a non-circular oval gradient. So I can kind of do real nice selective edits. This is not perfect because I'm using too soft of a brush, too large of a brush probably. But for example, you can see how I could quickly darken the background of my photo and or say, oh, it looks a little too blue. I'll take maybe the saturation out of it. I could fine tune that by going into the erase button here. And now I can erase out things that I did that I don't like. And then I can switch back to A and paint some more. And there's also B, which is for like a different size or different type of brush. So you're switching between A and B painting and erasing. So it allows you to kind of fine tune things. So say you know, that was a decent job and you want to do more. What you could do is you could hit close and then go back into adjustment brush and it'll make a new brush. So I'll click here and maybe this time I want to brighten. I could brighten just like this part of the photo. I don't know why I would do this, but the idea is you can layer these up and do lots of dodging and burning, or really could do any sorts of things. I normally use it for exposure for dodging and burning, but you could do, you know, changes to all these different things. So that lets you do real fine-tune work. All right, any questions so far? That's kind of like what I would normally cover in like 2 days of photo one, just really, really quickly sped up. The next kind of, or the most important thing to kind of know about Lightroom on day one, if you are new to it day one, is how to get photos out of it. So in this class, I think it makes sense if we just go back to the library module and click on export. And this, what's important is you have to export photos to apply the changes. So if I didn't do this, the great thing about Lightroom is I don't have to save, because I'm not generating a saved version of this until I export, basically. But the catalog will remember all the changes you make. So if you just close down the software, the changes you made are going to be remembered. But if I went into, I don't know if you can see this, so let me reshare it. If you went into your file structure and just found the file number that you wanted, if I go back into this original folder I had with the photos, and I grabbed whatever photo I just edited, it's not going to have any of those changes that I made applied to it, because this is the original photo from the camera. It's been brought into Lightroom, into the database. The database remembers the changes you make to it. It makes a preview of those changes, but it doesn't actually apply any of those changes until you export it. So that's why I got to go over here to export. I got to click on the one photo that I just edited. I don't know if I actually did that. So let me. Okay, I'm still on it. Okay, and if I edited a bunch of photos, I can go ahead and I can hold down Command and I can click on, you know, a few at random, where I could click on that one photo and I could click Shift and click on another and it'll grab everything in a series, or I could just click Command A and it'll grab everything. But I'm just going to do this one image. So I'm going to do Command D to deselect and just grab the one, go back to export. And what I want to do is I'm going to export the file. I could name it, and I think this is kind of really important, and I could put it in a specific location. So what I would normally do is when I'm done actually editing photos, I put them in my actual artwork folder, and I put them in whatever project it's called. And I've got a bunch of different projects here, but I put them in that folder. For you, what I would recommend maybe is just making a folder, and I talked about this before, of making a Lightroom folder, and in a subfolder you'd have your like camera files, which is where you should put your photos once you download them from the camera. And what I would normally do then is I would make an exports folder, or maybe call it a project one folder. Okay, and choose that. And that way, when you want to actually grab your files to drop them into the critique and submit them, the slideshow and submit them, I mean, you just grab that folder. It'll be easy to find. So what I always do though is, so I put them in that folder, and what I always do is I rename them. So in this case, I've got my photos called 7695. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to like make it really easy to organize. I'm going to call it maybe my last name, and I'm going to call it photo project one. Okay, and then what it will do, which I only grabbed one photo, so this is maybe not the best example, is if you have multiple photos, it will make an _1 or an _2, or it will, like, you can name them all one thing for this class with your name in it, with this project in it, and it will number them. So if you grab 5 photos, it will number them with an _1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for each of the 5 different photos. But since I've only grabbed one, it isn't doing that. So name them. Important. Make it easy for me to match them to your name, to make sure to grade them easily. Because what you're going to do is you're going to submit them in the critique slideshow, but you're also going to submit them on D2L. I actually grade them through D2L. We critique them through the critique slideshow because I can't really grade. I can't open up the critique slideshow in Photoshop or in Lightroom to actually see your files, if that makes sense. So I'm going to collect them in 2 different spots. Okay, file settings, JPEG. I would just keep it at maximum quality. I would not limit the file size. Normally, I would say put them in ProPhoto RGB space because we'd be printing them, and that's the best color space for printing. For the internet, it doesn't really matter. sRGB is actually best for viewing on the internet, so I guess that's why I have that set there. And then my recommendation is to resize them for the slideshow purposes. It probably will drop in fine. Google Slides works pretty well. Photo or PowerPoint, they would often have problems. So I would leave that off actually. But this would let you shrink down your file size or your pixel dimensions if they were too large and you're having trouble loading them. All right, that's it. You could sharpen it for screen. You don't have to. Either way is fine. And then I would hit export, and it's set here to do show in Finder. And the reason that I like that is when I'm done and I've moved on to, I click export and I go and I move on to something else, especially if I have a lot of files, it pops up the full Finder window with that file. So if you do that, you'll know, oh, okay, the files are ready. And then you can just drag them straight into your Google slideshow and or upload on D2L very quickly and easily. Google Slides, I was just dragging them straight out of a Finder window. Okay, so that is everything that I would really say is important to know on day 1. What do y'all think? Questions?